everyone. I am Oracle Oriah, and I am here with Stephen Mehler, and he is sharing with us every week this summer. So, well, I don't know how long we're going to go, but we're going to be dissecting, and he is going to be unveiling all of his work in Khemitology and talking about his work with Hakim in his alternative Egyptian studies that he has been studying for 55 years. He's also bringing in the understanding of matriarchy and patriarchy in our timeline, in this cycle of our current civilization, of where we are today. He is showing us how it impacts us and taking us all the way back into history. And it is the most fascinating tour, the fascinating study that only Stephen can bring to us. So please welcome Stephen. So thank you so much. This is part 2, and I cannot wait to see what's going to happen today. So
well, thank you. It's great. I do just want to slightly recap what we did last week.
Yes.
So that people will know. We started with matriarchy.
Yes.
Matriarchy was a basis for a study that I started in the mid-'60s, carried through the '70s, and got a master's degree from Women's Studies Department at San Jose State University in 1978, where I argued about the role and position of women in ancient Egypt, that it was a matriarchy. Okay, from there, we did discuss my background. I was touched by the Sphinx at 8 years old, a spirit guide. She, and we'll talk again why she today in more detail, she led me to my next guide, who was at the title Akhenaten, and that will be our 3rd session. Today we're going to do my first book, Land of Osiris.
Land of Osiris.
The next session will be my 2nd book, From Light into Darkness, where we'll go great detail in the origin of religion itself and this particular person, Akhenaten. So then,
that's exciting.
The Sphinx led me through my journey through the 70s and 80s, and then, as I said, I did a San Francisco Life Expo, where I found out that there was a gentleman who kept the old ways, and they told me his name was Hakim. Boom. I had to find him. Okay, we went to 92. 92, I come to Egypt, and I meet him, standing in front of the Sphinx. And it was obvious that what he was presenting was not just random reinterpretation of artifacts. He was presenting a system. So then he left it with me that you come back, you study with me, stay with me. It took me 5 years to get the money together, but in 1997, a series again of miraculous events happened. I had the money, went back, spent 3 weeks with him, and those 3 weeks became the book, The Land of Osiris. So what I'm going to do with you this morning is actually go in more detail than I've ever done in an interview before, because I'm going to let everybody know what it was like to actually sit with him and the many, many hours. I open up the introduction of the book and I say, through numerous cups of tea and many, many rounds of shisha, we came to this conclusion. And that's what it was like. And I'm going to explain to people. But what it first came clear to me is that he was presenting a system. And he talked about a term he used called, in the ancient language, Bu-Wizard. Bu meant land. Wizard is the correct ancient term for Osiris. A lot of people think it's Osar or Asar. No, it was wizard. And it's where the English words wisdom and wizard come from.
Right.
So we're going to explain that in detail. But first, he presented to me, and we started with this last week. We only did one. I said there were couple of numbers that came up very important as key to understanding chematology. One, 5, and the other 42. First, again, I'm going to reestablish how we came up with the title. Everybody thinks the name of the country today is Egypt. Everybody thinks that's always been the name of the country. No. Egypt is based on a Greek word, Aegyptos. Aegyptos comes from a contraction, Hegyptos. Hegyptos is based on the ancient term Het Ka Ptah. Het means place. Ka, we can go in great detail, and we will go in more detail. But the Ka was like your personality, your double, your etheric body, that which stays with the body when the body dies. So it was like our ego in a way.
Right.
Ptah is another one that we could go on for a long time talking about, but I'm going to give you some real juicy things about this. Ptah in Egyptology is considered a male creator god, a male creator deity, aspect, god, Ptah. But the word Ptah is very close to an Egyptian word today, Pit, which means thing. just the thing. Hakim was the only one who came up with this translation for Ptah. He said it means the one who pops from the blue. Wow. That right away opened us up. When I first heard that, wow, we're talking extraterrestrial here? Then later, years later, he gave me the full meaning. It's Ptah Tatenin, and it means the one who popped from the blue, through the waters, from the sky. Right away, from the blue. The blue is the sky.
These are from the glyphs.
Yeah, this is his translation. Understand? It's his translation. But it is saying, okay, first people want to think, is it saying a physical AT? Was Ptah a physical extraterrestrial? Well, he would say not necessarily. He did say there was a time, and we're going to go into more detail about this because this is what you and a lot of your listeners are interested in, the extraterrestrial question. As I said, I have a whole chapter in Land of Osiris, the extraterrestrial question, where we talk about these things. So, Ptah, could it be? Well, it means that the energy, the Nether, which is what we call it, not God or goddess. The term for these were Nethers, usually pronounced NTR because that's what the glyph says. We put the E in there, Nether. Now, it's been mistranslated in Egyptology to mean God and goddess, deity. It never meant deity to the very, very ancients.
Really?
It means aspect of creation. Also, Hakim said it was a sense that we have. That we have all these, so as above, so below, whatever outside, whatever on the high levels, on the low level, macro to the micro. So he was saying we are innately born with 360 senses. If we only think 5, we are limiting ourselves.
I agree.
So he would say, to example, someone would say to him, I saw a dream last night. He would say, no, you didn't. Your eyes were closed. You were sleeping. But we only have the language of the 5.
Right. So we have to say dream.
And, or we have to come up with a different way of explaining. But as he said, and I'm going to go into this in more detail, they will label themselves. So there's 180 we label feminine, 180 we label masculine. Those are the senses, those are the netters, those are the gods and goddesses. So right away, his first teaching is this was not a polytheism. It was not a polytheism. They were not worshiping 360 gods and goddesses. From the very beginning, they knew there was only one complete system that put us together. We call it God. They knew there was only one connection. So to lay out the founding then, it gave us these symbols of 5. So first, we come to the title of the country. Het Ka Ptah. This is the place where the Ka, or the personality, or the double of this creator aspect manifested. And it is only one site. It is today near the Egyptian city of Memphis, Menepher. The village is called Mitrahena. People go to Memphis, it's a great site there.
Wow.
But there's a stele there. A stele is a stone where inscriptions are on. The stele says that's where Ptah manifested, Het Ka Ptah. Hakim said there was only one site. That wasn't the whole civilization. The whole civilization was Khemt, as we said, with the hard KH, Chem. It became with a T ending, Khemt. We pronounce it Kemet. We spell it the way I spell it, just as different from other people that spell it. And then so what we were teaching then is Khemitology, not Egyptology. And Kemet talks about previous advanced civilization over 10,000 years ago. These are the people that carved the Sphinx and built the pyramids. The dynastic, what we see was only a remnant, a shadow of what the great past was. So the layout, then he comes with the number 5. So we talk about, he said, Egypt, like many of the cultures in that day, was a sun culture, followed the movement of the sun. So they came up with the idea of 5 spaces of the sun, 5 movements of the sun, 5 stages. And so that would make up a full day, right? But it also represented 5 stages in our evolution, 5 instances of prehistory. So he would say that the whole cycle of 5 is a 65,000-year cycle. Interestingly enough, after he gave us that number, a friend of mine who was involved in the research with us found a book about ancient Babylon, Sumer. And they found in the temple of one of the Sumerian kings named Ashurbanipal, there was a particular reference to a date in the Sumerian language that they were saying was very important. And that date comes out to be 64,800 years ago, 65,000 years. So the cycle he's talking about is a full 65,000 year cycle. The first stage was called Kheper, and it's the scarab beetle. Each stage has an image and a color and a tone. So the Kheper, the scarab beetle. The scarab beetle is called the driller. What does that mean? Well, the scarab beetle is a hermaphrodite. It's both male and female in one creature.
Right.
Each one gives birth. When it gives birth, it looks for a source to put the egg into for energy. And what it is in Egypt is usually camel dung, or would be in some refuse of an animal. It puts the egg in it, rolls the ball up, and rolls the ball in front of it.
Wow.
And so, you know, a law of nature is what's waste for one is food for another. As soon as the egg hatches, it has a source of food supply. It's the dung of another animal.
Mm-hmm.
But when the Cometians looked at it, like pushing the ball that the scarab beetle does, they saw it was like bringing the disk of the sun up in the morning at dawn.
Wow.
So the scarab beetle becomes a symbol of dawn, the birth of consciousness. Second stage, and this is where it always is interesting. It's not so much anymore, but when I used to lecture this 20 years ago, second stage is Ra. Ra. Well, everybody's heard Ra. Ra. Then somebody would say, well, Ra is the sun god, right? And I'd say, no, wrong, thanks for playing. Ra is only 1/5 of this understanding. Ra is the sun at noon, the heat of the sun. And Ra represents the adolescent stage of consciousness. We all know, like teenagers, if you've had children, we know when we're teenagers, we think we know everything. It's a stubborn stage. So, and what was the animal? Not the donkey like we think today, the ram, the male sheep, because the ram is a very stubborn animal. Right. And so the ram was the original symbol of Ra. This is important to understand because when we talk about a little bit of history, people see Ra today as the falcon that comes later. The original symbol of Ra was the ram. Third stage is called Un. It's usually depicted by a mature man, because this becomes patriarchal when it's being devised, on a staff standing up. And it's called the wise. It represents the sun going across the strong afternoon sun. It represents a stage when we've achieved a state of consciousness. We're wise. We're mature adults.
Right.
Fourth stage, very important stage, called Aten or Iten. And it means the wiser. And it's usually an old man hunched over on a staff. Later, the symbol of it used by Akhenaten is 3 beams of the sun coming down, ending in an Ankh. That later becomes the symbol of Aten. But the original symbol of Aten is an old man on a staff. It's the sun at the full height of its glory. The sun highest in the afternoon, full blowing of consciousness. So it's when we're at the highest state of consciousness.
Wow.
It's actually expression that's put on the walls, and we'll talk about it again. To walk with the Nethers means that you have full 360 senses being used. And it's also twilight. It's when the sun is starting to wane. The 5th stage. And of course, we're going to discuss the 4th stage in great detail in the next stage because Akhenaten took that stage in his title. He wanted to return. And we're going to go more detail of that next week.
Okay.
5th stage, most important to understand, is called Amen or Imen. It means the hidden. It's night. The sun has gone down. There's no more light. Everything is split. Polarity, opposition, duality, us and them, and it's darkness. The truth is hidden. So when I used to lecture 15, 20 years ago, I would stop at this point and I would say to the audience, what stage do you think we're at now? Now, I get a different answer today. You would give a different answer because people today have come a lot further. But in those days, people would say, oh, we're in Aten. We're in the highest state of consciousness, aren't we? And again, it's wrong, thanks for playing. Because as John Anthony West used to say, and I used to like to quote it, but the quote is dated. He would say, we today think we're the most supreme, form of human that's ever been on the planet with our hydrogen bombs and striped toothpaste. Now, anybody born before 1960, after 1960, doesn't know what striped toothpaste was because that was big in the 60s. But it's true. With our weapons of arms, no. The truth is, we are in the fifth stage, the stage of Amen. Amen, Imen, the hidden duality. And what is it characterized by? 5,000 plus years of patriarchy, which we discussed last week indeed, systematic warfare. Now people will stop here and say, wait a minute, haven't humans always fought wars? Well, there's always been conflict. There may have been always a battle over a water hole or food or a little dispute here and there. But what we call systemic warfare means organized armies, city-states did not exist before 5,000 years ago. Again, like we said last week, there were no wars in matriarchy, none whatsoever. There were no religion, there were no gods either. So we are in the state of darkness for 5,000 years. Why? So important that Hakim was released this information by his masters to give to me, to give to anyone else who was ready, is that we're coming out of this state. Now let's think this word again. Amen. Amen. That's a word we know. In Hebrew, it's Amen. In Christianity, it's Amen.
Right.
In Islam, it's Amin. What does it mean? Thy will be done. So let it be.
Right.
But it's usually so let it be as God wills it. No. And again, I'm not here, and we'll do the same caveat next week. I'm not here to put down anybody's religion, just to speak truth to power. But when Christians, Jews, and Muslims say this word at the end of a prayer, they think they are saying, let God, let thy will be done. What they are really saying is, so let it be hidden. So let it be in darkness.
Oh, no.
Now all the Christians and Jews and Muslims in the audience are going, what?
Oh, no, such bad news.
Uh-huh. So,
wow.
but the point of the whole idea, the teachings for him being released, is that we're coming into the new stage of Kheper, a new dawn. We've gone through 65,000 years of these cycles. And so he would say, he called it the awakening. Now, a lot of people who may be tuned in, I know a lot of people who came with me on tour first heard of Hakim from a video series that was produced in 2009, 2010 called The Pyramid Code. Many people have seen it. That's where they first see Hakim. I introduced Hakim to the woman who did this video series, etc. Without going into detail, it's only a very superficial understanding of his treatment. But it was what exposed a lot of people to Hakim. And a lot of people came on tour with me and contacted me and our school wanting to know more because of the Pyramid Code. So we're grateful for that. But here we're going to go into the details. So here are the 5 stages. So the 5 stages represent time frames. Like I said, we've been, and Hakim said we're very fortunate. Because this 5th stage, Amen, always is the shortest stage of the cycle. Now, we can't say that because 5,000 years is a long time.
Right.
But some of the other stages last 20,000 years, 30,000 years. So what he wanted to do was take me back and take everybody back to the stage before Amen, to the stage of Aten, which was ancient Kemet, where the pyramids were built and the Sphinx was carved, where we were in the highest state of consciousness. So one of the first questions people have asked, did aliens build the Great Pyramid? And I say it's a difficult answer. The direct answer is no. But it's not to say that there was not influence, which we will discuss.
Right.
But I say we, human beings, in the highest states of consciousness, were able to do these things that we're going to talk about. So that's important to understand the 5 stages. So everything is cycles. The key element of the teaching, which is the basis after matriarchy, and because the matriarchy falls into this, everything is in cycles. Everything is moved cycles within cycles. And he said it's not just like this, it's a spiral. And we're always spiraling upward. We're always spiraling upward. So in this teaching, very obviously, Hakim is saying that he and the ancient Commissions did not believe in a Big Bang theory. Because he's saying there was no beginning. If there's no beginning, there's no end. Just cycles upon cycles upon cycles. So when we consider the birth of this physical universe, this Big Bang was just one of many cycles. Because now it's so amazing the discoveries that are being found in theoretical and quantum physics now. Because the fascination that Einstein proposed this idea of black holes, and now black holes are supposed to become a reality with an observation, that we think of black holes as the ultimate death symbol. Because it's so dense, everything that gets in what's called the event horizon of a black hole is sucked into it and absorbed and annihilated. But now, you know what they find? On the other side of the black hole, stars are birthed. Stars are born. And so it's a continual life, death. This is why the Khemitologist did not have a word for death in their language. They said it was westing, or going to the west. Just changing form. So in other words, they didn't teach the dichotomy that we teach today. There's life and there's death. No. It was all life. This was just westing, was just going to another phase. So that consciousness is always. So in other words, instead of defining God, the ancients called it just consciousness. It is always, and it always will be. So here we go back. I'm going to go into this again, more detail next week when we talk to religion, about religion. But here's just the example of it. The Greeks and the patriarchal Hebrews, later Jews, couldn't carry this understanding forward. So the Greeks come in, and first the Hebrews, they write it down, they don't understand. So because they're creating a new system, patriarchy, there has to be a beginning. But the Hebrew word that is the first word of the Bible, I learned it as Bereshis. Today it's Bereshith. They use the T and the S are interchangeable today. Most of the time they use the T ending. So what you will see today in Hebrew, the word is Bereshit. Okay. Here come the logical left-brain Greeks. They don't understand the word. So they said, well, the best word we can come up with it in Greek is Genesis. Genesis means the beginning.
Right.
But you know what the word Bereshit really means? It's describing an event that happened, is happening, and continues to happen.
Wow.
So within the word Bereshit is creation and evolution together, not opposition thinking. Either there's creation or there's evolution. Can't be both. Oh, no. Creation was just a singular event for this cycle, continues to evolve. But the Greeks couldn't understand, so Genesis becomes in the beginning. So there's the first word of our Bible. So I used to say, and I'm going to, again, go into much more detail next week, if the first word is translated wrong, what is it to say about the rest of it? So there's your 5 stages. So now we come to the 5 pers. We did only one last week, the first, per-ah. But there are 5 of them. Per-ah, the high house, the woman's house. Descent went from mother to daughter, matrilineal, throughout the history. Even when it became patriarchal in so-called dynastic times, which we'll talk about much more detail next week. It becomes more and more patriarchal, more and more male influence. Still to the end, its descent is matrilineal. And Cleopatra is the last ruler, a woman. So, second one is per ba. The ba, incorrectly translated, we feel, as soul. We'll talk about that much more in detail next week. I prefer to use the word spirit. It's depicted always, when you see it on the walls, as the body of a bird and a human head. Because that's how they envisioned the spirit. The spirit was not bounded by the limits of the body. Spirit could go into other dimensions. Spirit could go into other realities. So it was free. So that was the Ba. So per Ba was the house where the Ba becomes realized. What was that? Well, that's the area where you do spiritual practices, where you meditate, where you chant, use sound, things to raise up the consciousness, so you realize that you're more than the body, that you are spirit, and that became the temple. Third, per Ka. Ka, you mentioned the Ka. It's the etheric, the double. They show, when they would show creation mythology, the Khemitologist, one of their creators was called Khnum. It was a ram that had curvy, wavy hair. So you can see him. He's called the divine potter. He supposedly makes our body on the potter's wheel. And when it's ever depicted, it always shows 2 bodies being made. The physical body, called the Khat, with a T, and the Ka, the personality, the double, which has attached itself to the body. It's the ego. What is it that we think is so afraid of death? What is it why people have such a fear of death? Because the ego is afraid.
Right.
The ego is going to die with the body. So it's afraid. So it attaches, it makes us so afraid. Spirit, the Ba, doesn't care less. The Ba keeps going.
Right.
So what becomes the Per-Ka? The tomb. That's where the body is laid. That's where the Ka, they would make offerings to the Ka throughout the dynasties. From the Old Kingdom to the Middle Kingdom, to the New Kingdom, to the Greeks, to the Romans, to the very end. In the tomb, you make offerings to the Ka, to the personality, because it's there. Last, and interestingly enough, it's called Per-Neter, the house of the Neter. Well, people think, oh, that's the temple too, isn't it? No. That became the pyramid. So it's the house of the Neters themselves. Again, the word Neter, and I can't even, Hakim was such a master of language. He used to pronounce it like you really have to roll the R. Like, I can speak French, but I can't roll that R as great as the French. Neter. I mean, he would, Neter, and he would roll that R. Neter. Okay. The Greeks came into Egypt, and they saw they were talking this word, Neter, Neter, Neter. They heard it as Neter, and so they pronounced it Neter. And they identified it with their word, physis. Physis is the physical. Physis is where physics comes from. Physis is the body. So to them, physis was nature. But they were pronouncing it nature. Here come the Latin-speaking people, the Romans. Here the Greeks pronouncing it nature. They identified it with their word, natura, which was nature. So
Or natural.
Same thing.
Right.
The Per-Neter is the house of nature, house of energy. In no way was it the tomb. In no way was a person supposed to be buried there. So here we make the definitive statement right at the beginning of the lecture. No one in its original incarnation was ever to be buried in a pyramid. Ever. So that means a priori, every body, every burial that's been found in a pyramid is an intrusive burial that's been put in there centuries, if not thousands of years later. And interestingly enough, girlfriend, this is what I tell everybody, there has never been an original burial found in an Egyptian
What was the
pyramid.
original use then of the pyramids?
House of energy.
So I've seen.
Back up.
Are they batteries?
A book on our reading list. A book on our reading list is a person that I was connected with. I'm not connected anymore, but I still respect his work. Christopher Dunn, an engineer who came to Egypt and back engineered the Great Pyramid and said it was a machine, not a tomb.
I've seen that blueprint.
So these are machines. They produce
Battery.
more than a battery.
And so they would light up the city. All the gold tops, wouldn't they connect and create a grid of light? Or
Well, this was question 101 that George Norrie asked me the first time I was on Coast to Coast in 2001. I was supposed to be on with Art Bell, who was the master of that medium. Art Bell had hurt his back, was out. There was a substitute came in. It was one of the first times he'd been on the air. And his name was George Norrie. And he took over the show. So he asked me that, well, Stephen, what did they use the energy for? I said, George, what do we use energy for? Whatever they needed to power their civilization. So what Chris Dunn found out, he postulated, and he was absolutely correct, that they actually broke down chemical bonds to form hydrogen gas. And hydrogen gas was produced in the Great Pyramid, and this is what was used for energy. But I mean, we have quantum waves, radio waves. We have so many different types of energy that were produced in the Great Pyramid. It'd take lifetimes to categorize them all. Even energies we don't know about.
Woo! That statement.
It was a great radio station. That's another thing. Now, we had heard a rumor. My friend and I, we went, this is in 97 when we're formulating everything. We asked Hakim that, if we show you pictures, I can send you pictures. The Great Pyramid is the only one that's not capped. It doesn't have the cap. It's flat base. So we used to ask him. People have postulated that quartz rods came up to the top of the pyramid. There's holes in the pyramid. I've never been up to the top.
I have.
I doubt you climbed to the top.
I climbed to the top. It was so hot. I couldn't be in there for more than a couple of minutes. I had to turn around and
now you're an important witness for me.
Yeah.
Did you take any pictures?
Yes. And my husband led a meditation up there for 10 minutes.
Did you take any picture of the
Yes.
ground, what it looked like? Okay.
I will go through them.
Okay,
see.
because our idea, it was never capped. Listen. So we said that these quartz rods would come up to serve as an antenna. Hakim would say no. And he would point at the pyramid and said, that's the antenna.
That's the what?
That's the antenna. The pyramid is
Of
the
course,
antenna.
Of course.
So what kind of communications? We asked, what kind of communications? Did it receive communications from extraterrestrials?
Right.
Perhaps. But more likely, interdimensionals. And did it communicate to others? Yes. To other ET beings? Perhaps. But more likely...
They lined it up right under Orion. Isn't that correct?
Forget about Orion. We're going to go through that. Orion is not important. Sirius is much more important than Orion. If you've heard about beings from Sirius involved with the Egyptian civilization, it's much more important than Orion.
I've heard that.
Orion is a false herring, and we'll go into detail. But anyway, so he said more likely the communications were from interdimensionals and communications. He said they could communicate with every dimension. And so the idea, it's always been postulated that the ancient Khemitologist priests, when they would sleep, they would visit other dimensions and other worlds. They had the ability to do that. It's a practice today in Tibetan Dzogchen. It's actually the practice of Tibetan Buddhism. It's called lucid dreaming. That before you go to bed, you can actually program your dreams. Say what you want to dream about. If it's been a recurring dream, you want to continue it, you want to finish it, and you can actually program your dreams. It's called lucid dreaming. Well, we know the ancient Khemitologist did this all the time. Okay. So it's an antenna, it's a machine, produced various energies. What it certainly was not is a tomb. Any burial that's been found in there is what's called in archaeology an intrusive burial. Much, much later. Okay. So that's the 5. So that's 4. So he said there had to be 5. So he gave us 4 are in the book, and he couldn't remember what was the 5th one. Well, we went on tour in 1998. We went to the Temple of Edfu, and there right on the wall was the 5th. It's called the Per-Wer, and it shows again, Wer is also another symbol like of Un, a man with staff standing up. It's the highest state. But it means the house of the wise man, the house of the teacher. That means it was part of the Per-Ba, the temple. But there were areas of the Per-Ba where the teachings were, sacred teachings, higher teachings. These was the first universities. Some people put up a post on Facebook, oh, the oldest university in the world is the 1200 Muslim guy. I said, no.
I have to interject this quick story. When we were in a temple in Egypt, we wanted to have one last channeling episode, and we're not allowed to do that, so we had to bribe the tour guide. And so we go into this area, and I'll send the pictures later so you see which area. And it was the one with the big monolithic those
obelisk? Obelisk?
Well, they're round pillars, but there's so many of them. There's like 15, 20 in a row. Like they're just massive pillars. And inside of those, they had these little temples. And so we found this one room, and we were we felt very strongly that that's the room we need to go in. So we sat in there. My husband channeled. There was orbs caught on video. It was supernatural. We felt like all 20 of us were crammed in this room, and we felt we were going to lift off, and we felt so strong. So we were walking away, and we asked the tour guide, anything special about this room? And his face was like he saw a ghost. And he says, this was the room that the good priests would speak in this room with other priests. This was the communion room. This was the holy room, what you chose. Out of all the rooms, this is the one we chose. So that is exactly what you're talking about. They had these classroom-like settings.
That's right. And it was specific because, again, as Hakim would say, the site dictates what's there. Right. So at each site where there's a temple or a pyramid, there's underground running water, igneous rock, volcanic rock, quartz, again, laden rock, and a natural source of crystal. So these areas will be where the water was running the highest, would be the high energy centers. Again, when he was a young man, he went all over Egypt, and the keeper showed him all these places.
There was aqueducts running throughout the entire...
Oh, there's water running through today, under all the major
And the Nile, by the way, is so soft and beautiful, the energy, you could just fall asleep on the boat.
It's not the original river. The original river was the Western Desert. That's what we're going to talk about again.
Woo!
Okay, so there's the groundwork. Okay. So from the groundwork, then, he would say each cycle is determined how the Nethers are defined. So then he would say how because this is where the Egyptologists get confused. Because when it goes from Ra to to Aten, and then finally it's Aten when they first. You see, there's no drawing, there's no writing. Writing doesn't come until the very beginnings of Amun, because what is happening when we're in the age of Aten? All 360 senses are there. So as I said to you last week, and I say it again because it's important, we didn't communicate like this. We didn't speak to each other. We telecommunicated, telepathy. That's how we communicate when we have all the senses. So there's an event, which I talk about in detail in the book, we can talk about today. We think that a great cataclysmic event occurred between 10 and 12,000 years ago. It shook up everybody in the stage out there. Everybody's in this reverie of being in the highest state of consciousness. It was shook. Everybody got shook. So the priests then who were in the know, they weren't priests yet, but they began to understand that people were going to lose their consciousness.
Because they went into duality and fear. And
that's what led to the development of writing. First way writing came was just pictographic symbols. They'd be in the temple in this per-word area, the university area, and the priest would hold up a symbol, and people would have to explain what the symbol means.
Did this come before runes?
Yes. Well, these are runes. It's the same thing.
They're the same. But were the
glyphs and runes are the same thing.
Were they first in writing?
Commission started writings 6 to 8,000 BCE. I question anybody in the world to show me writing that's older. They claim that the Tamil writing in the south of India is older. I haven't seen any documented evidence. Okay. So you say that the runes are older than 10,000 years? Prove it, because we don't see any. Yes, they're symbols. Again, you can go back to the Upper Paleolithic 14,000 years ago, and you see that the Neanderthals are making spirals and they're making symbols. So symbols.
Is that in the Pyrenees?
Yes, in the south of France, where I did archaeology. So symbolic thinking goes back 30, 40, 50,000 years. But when it becomes a formal writing, a system of writing is not till about 6 to 8,000 years ago. And it's in Kemet. They're putting out these glyphs, the symbols, the signs, and they're the ones keeping control of what's being known. So that becomes writing. So people are always asking to me, well, we've got to find the oldest text. The oldest text will tell us. No.
Right.
Hakim always had a suspicion of the written word. Again, one of his maxims, a Hakimism, if it had to be written down, it's not the whole truth. It was only transmitted orally. So now we're coming into historical time. Okay, this is the basis to teach the five and the thing, and then comes to be an understanding of 42
This is all
different...
cyclical.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. It's coming
we
from...
have the sphere, we have the spiral.
You have the beginning is Kheper, 65,000 years ago. We're coming into consciousness. We're coming out of the darkness. So people start to meditate. They start to gravitate to sacred sites. So Hakim would say, 56,000 years ago, people gravitated to the Giza Plateau. All that was there then is what is called in geology, which I sent you the video clip, a yardang, just a natural limestone outcropping. That today is only the head of the Sphinx. That's all was above the surface. And they came there to meditate, to energize, as he would say, to energize themselves. They didn't understand why fully yet, but they felt the energy. So then, he said, more and more consciousness began to wane. More and more they came to the idea they had to have images. And that's when the story comes that Tefnut spoke to them and said, okay, you want an image of the Great Mother? She spit. The spit became the Sphinx. They carved immediately the head of the Sphinx, a lioness-human combination, and the chest and the forepaws. But what the great Robert Schoch geologist found when he excavated the area, he found that the erosion in the front of the Sphinx, the head, the body, the forelegs, was 8 feet. But the erosion in the back, the rump, and the tail of the Sphinx was 4 feet. And concluded she was not carved all at once, which is true. The story tells us she was carved in 3 different stages. First the head, chest, and the forepaws. Then the body, then the tail and the back.
Yeah, it's much larger in the front.
And not only that, though, but we talk about in the video that I showed, the head is totally out of proportion today.
Totally.
Not into proportion of the body. So she's been carved back at least 2 to 3 times. So the carving, as it is now, we go right back to dynastic times. The tribes are coming in. they're deciding to form a union. And again, as in most of patriarchal mythology, it's usually a conquest of a male king that conquers another system and absorbs it. But this is not what happened in this matriarchal system. There was not a conquest. There was an agreement of a marriage contract between a woman of the north, who was the ruler of the northern tribes, and she was a black African woman, with a ruler of the south, a male. They
So
formed
they
a marriage.
married instead of going to war.
She chose him. Again, that's the matriarchal way. Instead of fighting a war, let's form a union. And they took 42 different tribes. Of those 42 tribes were all races of people. Black, brown, red, yellow, and white. Because Hakim would teach that the white Caucasian race did not evolve on the steppes of Russia, the Caucasus Mountains, where the word Caucasian comes from, but all races evolved in Africa, including the white race.
That's the Aryans, right?
That's India. That's later.
That's northern India, right?
Yes, the Aryans come later. That's 5,000 years ago. That's much later. This is talking over 10,000 years ago. The white people were in Africa. 42 tribes form a union. They form and this becomes what is known today as Kemet, dynastic Kemet, the first dynasties. The first dynasties were each tribe, and different tribes ruled at different times. That's why if you look at some people try to say that today all the ancient Egyptians were all black because it's Africa. But if you look at the racial imagery, you see all races of people. All the different tribes of all different races, and all different tribes ruled at different times. So you get different ruling tribes, different tribes. So this becomes then what is known as the Old Kingdom period. They didn't call it that. But this is when you form now a great renaissance. You had great technology. This is when you have a lot of building they start building tombs. Now here's another key understanding.
Right.
When Hakim started to introduce chematology to me, he took me to a certain point on the Giza Plateau. And it's where we always like to start the tours, but unfortunately, the last couple of tours we did, because of logistics and other people planning the tours, it didn't start out that way. But the last tour, if I come back again, it'll do this way. Because he takes you to the highest point of the Giza Plateau, and that's standing in front of the middle pyramid, not the Great Pyramid. The Great Pyramid is not on the highest point of the plateau. The middle pyramid is. So Hakim would say he stood there as a teenager, and he looked and he felt the energy is really centrally located here. And so he went in, as I mentioned, he went into the tunnels. And he took me in the tunnels. So his idea was that the Commissions, of course, with using 360 senses, worked with the natural telluric energies of the earth, the natural grid line, the ley lines, the power points. And they saw that there was a great east-west line that was a water line of natural water was coming through underneath. And so they dug down and they built these tunnels. They built tunnels to connect with the natural tunnels. They built way out into the western desert where it was the original Nile, which is called in my book the Ur-Nil. It's a German researcher named M.L. Blankenhorn first postulated this idea in the late 19th century, that there was an original Nile, that the Nile today is not the original.
So they moved it through their aqueduct system.
Yes. He called it Ur. Ur in German means primordial, primal Nile.
They wanted to bring it more into the metropolis, probably.
They were creating the energy grid, understand? Right. So what he tried to make us understand, which Egyptology totally does not understand, that they went underneath and they drilled through limestone bedrock and they connected with the natural tunnel systems and brought water from at least 50 miles away, could be hundreds of miles, to the Giza Plateau, and created the system then. So that they could build temples, and the pyramids were already there, and they built the pyramids based on the water lines. This is the ancient Commissions who built the water tunnels, not the dynastic people, okay? The ancient Commissions. So in other words, what he's saying, first thing constructed before anything above ground were the underground tunnels. They had the idea, their non-consciousness, that we're going to create a civilization in this area. We need to bring the water in so we can have agriculture to grow food, and that's when they built the tunnels. Then the dynastic peoples come in, okay?
I grew up Christian. Obviously, I'm no longer, but I understand the Christian philosophy. So when the priests were collecting these downloads, they would give it to the king to do these things. But you're saying everybody.
That's much later.
But there was
what we're talking about, there's no kingship, okay? We're talking about over pre-10,000 years ago.
Wow.
Okay? 12,000 years ago is when we think this, what's called the Vela supernova. People can Google VELA, Vela supernova. It has been confirmed by astrophysics, astronomy, because we still have remnants, effects in our solar system of this event that happened 14,000 years ago. So it's a supernova. So that came in. Then, now we're talking about when the Sphinx was carved, the face was changed, the first king comes in, you have the first dynasties, first people coming in, 42. They go into the underground tunnels, and they decide to shape them. The priests are the ones. Now you have priests. I'm going to go next week into detail how religion origins, how the priests come to be.
I cannot wait.
But for now,
Right.
they modified the existing water tunnels to become tombs. So here's a
That
key
makes so much
understanding.
sense.
Here's where we differ tremendously from Egyptology. Egyptology wants to teach you that they came in the fourth dynasty, third dynasty around 4,500 years ago and drilled all these tunnels and made them into tombs. We go into tunnels that are impossible to have been made into tombs, where you come in and you're going to drop down to another 500 feet.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is the acoustics.
Even the ones we went in were difficult to understand how they created tombs in there.
Exactly.
Very, very hard to get into, very difficult to maneuver around.
And the acoustics, though. It's
Yeah.
tremendous harmonics and resonance.
Yes, the whole, you speak the whole.
It's the same thing we say about the Great Pyramid. You go in there and you tone and you chant and you create these incredible overtones.
Yes.
What, do dead bodies need overtones? Do dead bodies need chanting? Of course not.
Right.
This was to energize the water. Here's a system. And this is why Hakim chose me. Because of my background in archaeology, he looked at me and said, for you, it's going to be water and sound. The knowledge that the ancients had.
Chills, because those are the two areas I focus on.
We're gonna go so deep. We're gonna go deeper into this girl than you ever went before.
Oh my God! Okay.
And it's no accident that your man is a musician. No accident.
Right. No accident.
Because musicians live in sound.
Yeah.
The people
and we
that
live
came
across from the water, and all I talk about is water.
Of 20 tours that I did, the people that got it the most were musicians because they live in sound.
Yeah.
So that's the point. The interplay of sound and water. He said these tunnels were cut with sound, carved with sound, with acoustic energy and acoustic science that we're just beginning to understand today.
Yes.
With someone like Nassim Hamarim teaches, but he's only superficially understanding it. And they did it to bring the water in. The sound. And why are these acoustics? Why are the pyramids so acoustical? Why are the tombs so acoustical? Because they charged the water with sound. And they used two different types of water. Coming in the Great Pyramid was an underground water coming depths of the earth, cold, full of minerals and nutrients. Now, if I take you on the Giza Plateau, which I hope to one day, I will show you in front of the pyramids. There are holes in the plateau, square holes and round holes. They're all filled in with sand today. In fact, a lot of them have cigarette butts in them where they threw their cigarettes. These originally were hollow. It would go down to another level of water that was coming along the surface that would be charged with solar power, solar energy from the sun.
Ooh.
So people want to know, what was the technology? No, it wasn't nuclear energy. No, it wasn't cobalt bombs. It was water, sound, and the sun. That's how they built the pyramids. They used sound to create anti-gravity fields. And therefore, a stone that weighs 1,000 tons, no gravity, no mass, no weight. A child could pick it up with a pinky and put it into place. So the Egyptologists want to let you believe that it took hundreds of thousands of workers working 30 years to build this tomb for Khufu, where Hakim and I agreed it could have taken a team. It could have taken a team of 80 scientists, men and women.
Well, they still can't recreate that.
They tried. They've tried. They could do a couple of blocks.
I think there's a prize for like a couple $1 million, whatever team can recreate.
No. In the 90s, Nova came, led by Mark Lehner, American Egyptologist who was his best buddy, to prove that they could do it through mechanical means. Okay. they're going to build a model pyramid next to the Great Pyramid. All right? They hired a couple of hundred workers from the village, Hakim's village. Hakim knew all of them, knew exactly what was going on. And they started hauling the blocks on sledges with people pouring water on the sledges, like they believe it was done. Well, understand this. 2 workers were killed. They were crushed by the stones. They couldn't build one course that way. But they were on a Nova deadline. They had to do a PBS special. So they brought in front end loaders and a helicopter. And they built 3 courses. And they showed that to the public, pretending like they had constructed it. It was not done by mechanical means. Nobody hauled any blocks. You're talking about blocks of the Great Pyramid. First of all, the Great Pyramid sits on 13 acres. 454 feet high. With a capstone, would have been 480 feet high. There was never a capstone. It says that the average side is 755 feet. But there is not one side of the Great Pyramid that is 755 feet long. One side 757, one side is 754, another side is 756. The average of the 4 sides is 755. But it's not exact. Why was it not exact? Why could they not build it exact? Because the ancients are trying to say that there is nothing that is exact. Mm-hmm. Everything is always shifting, changing from one microsecond to the other. We are not the same. Sometimes in 15 minutes, we've reestablished almost all cells of our body. Almost all our skin cells have reestablished ourselves within the course of a day. Mm-hmm. So they knew that. So nothing was exact. That's why there's never exact measurements. And this is what confounds them. If these were such great mathematicians, they were the forerunners of the Greeks. They were the forerunners of trigonometry, geometry, algebra, calculus. Every science we have today was forerunnered by the ancient Khemitologist. That's why we say alchemy. Alchemy. Al-Chem was an ancient Egyptian term for Egypt. Al-Chem, the land of Chem. It meant alchemy is the arts and sciences of ancient Chem. Every science, every art we have.
It was just all based on creation and the concepts of.
So it was water and sound.
Yeah.
They used sound to create an anti-gravity field, and they could lift those stones. Again, I'm saying, okay, 13 acres, no side is equal. It's estimated the Great Pyramid weighs between 6 and 7 million tons. It is estimated anywhere between 2.5 by one early analysis. A later computer analysis said as many as 3.9 million blocks of stone. The average weight is 2.5 tons. All the casing stones, which will come from a whole different area, the basic stones of the pyramid were quarried right on the plateau, but the casing stones come from Tura, which is near Cairo, 8 miles away, and the average block weighed 15 tons. But that's nothing. It is that they have found core blocks within the Great Pyramid. One weighs 880 tons. So how did they move that? By hauling blocks? Give me a break. Hakim would just completely say, and he said this on the Pyramid Code, this is what people picked up on the Pyramid Code. He'd say, the only way you could work with such weight is to deal with the gravity. No gravity, no weight. So there's the key. I will send you a picture. I can send you a video clip. There was a artifact in the Egyptian museum. It's going to be moved now because everything's being moved into the new museum. We hope that they will still display it. I don't know. They moved it a couple of times, but it's a disc. A disc that they say is made out of schist stone. It is not schist. Our geologists say it's what's called a metasedimentary rock. It has a lot of crystal in it. Schist does not. It has very paper thin. Like, first of all, how did they ever get stone to be that thin? And it has 3 lobes in it, 3 lips, and a center spoke. So what did the Egyptologists say? They said it was a ceremonial plate for lotuses. Ha, ha, ha. With a center spoke.
I remember seeing this, and they said this
I'll send you pictures.
The first known tool.
No. Well, possibly.
Okay.
But they don't say that.
Right.
The Egyptologists don't say that. We're saying it is an ancient tool. You're right. But they don't say that. You heard that coming from us. Center spoke, it would spin. It would spin at an ultrasonic frequency, produce a sound produce a sound wave. Also, with the disc is another slab of the same material. Hakim said that was a mirror. They would put that in, sound wave would go, would hit the mirror, come reflecting back, the waves would intersect. This was put in a award-winning, Emmy award-winning documentary by John Anthony West that came out in 1992. I knew the producers, I knew the directors, I knew all about this. I was involved with West at the time, giving him help and support, called Mysteries of the Sphinx, narrated by Charlton Heston. In there, they talk about it. They have an acoustic engineer named Tom Danley come on and demonstrate using sound waves, rising a pebble off the ground. And he shows the theory, this is not metaphysics. This is acoustical science. When these sine waves intersect, there are wells that are formed. In those wells, there is no gravity. This is scientifically proven. That's how they built it. That's how they could live. Again, you've been to Aswan, I'm sure. You saw the unfinished obelisk laying in the ground, right?
Yeah.
That they say was supposed to be done by Hatshepsut in the old mill. That is such nonsense. They said that, they were going to lift it, but it cracked and they couldn't lift it. Nonsense.
That's right.
Okay, first of all, it's one single piece of granite. Aswan granite, which we call rose granite or pink granite today, which is incorrect. It's called cyanide granite, full of quartz crystal. 7 on the Mohs scale, 10 being diamond, 7 high. So that's the level of quartz itself. So to cut granite, you have to be able to cut quartz. Can't be done with copper chisels, can't be done with bronze. None of the things that they had at that time. One single piece, 110 feet long, estimated to weigh 1,200 tons. It's obvious if you see that they were undercutting it. You could see how they were digging. And you go into the ditch like we did. I went in with David Hatchet-Childers in 2004. I've been videoed in the ditch. They supposedly don't let you go in there today. I can still get people in there. It all depends on who's the guards. You know how it is in Egypt.
Yeah, you pay for everything.
You arrange for it. You get it arranged. You go into places that you're not supposed to go. It's like we always used to tell people. People would come to Egypt the first day and they'd open up the guidebooks and say, okay, this is forbidden, this is forbidden, this is forbidden. I would say, all that means is more bakshish.
It just means more money.
Bakshish. That's a way of life. Okay. So one single piece. They were undercutting it, and when they got to the base, and I'll send you the pictures of it, they found a natural crack in the stone. Workers stopped. Why? This piece can't go to resonance because it's got a crack in it. So it's like, I tell people, you look at the work, and it's like they rang the bell for the lunch whistle, and nobody came back. The work was stopped. But these people say, oh, they couldn't do it, or they want to say that they had built a trench there, and they hauled them out to the river, and they took them to the boats. It's nonsense. They couldn't have moved that thing. Now, 1,200 tons.
Right.
So that's the proof that they had the technology. And right next to the obelisk itself is a test pit, because they did test pits to find out how the quality of the granite was. And the test pit goes down 50 feet in solid granite. So if you look at the unfinished obelisk, and I will send you pictures of it that you can show you folks, there are cracks in it all over. So they say, oh, it cracked. When they were doing it, it was, no. We know when the cracks came from an earthquake that hit Cairo in 1952. And that's what caused it to crack. And there's another crack in it, where it was obviously there was a cut going down, and stopped. Also in the 50s, the Egyptian government, with all the modern technology they had in the 50s to cut granite, were attempting to cut the granite, the obelisk, into pieces. Desecration that is, to cut up an artifact like that. And they were going to use the granite to construct, but they couldn't cut through it.
Oh.
In the 50s, they couldn't cut through it.
Wow. So,
yeah, that's the technology. So we're talking about an acoustical science, an understanding of sound, water, and technology that only we know today. So as I said, Hakim then laid out a story to us that the overall system was Kemet, but he said that there was an older part of it. And he took us, and that's my book takes you from one site to another, from Dashur in the south to Abu Nuwash in the north, including Giza and Saqqara. All were known for having stone masonry pyramids and temples, and all connected by an underground water grid of 25 square miles. And he called it Boo Wizard. The land of Osiris. So when I first was proposing to write a book, Barbara Hand Clow was the owner and Inner Traditions at that time. She then sold the company. But she was going to publish the book for me. And I said, well, I'm going to call it Boo Wizard. She said, you can't call it that. Nobody knows what that means. How can you call it by the English? The land of Osiris. And that's my first book. And that's what it is. So I take you from one site. I take you from all these sites, show you through photographs, through material, through discovery, how they were all ancient prehistoric sites, pre-dynastic sites that were taken over by the dynastic people and reused. Again, we say the Khemitans were the most conservative of people. They never threw anything away. One thing was always put on top of another. It's the same thing Native Americans do, same thing indigenous people do today, where they put their sacred houses, their long houses, their temples are on the sites of ancient prehistoric temples from previous people. Because if you have the energy, if you have the feeling, you can be led to where what we call the Holy of Holies. In every temple you went to, there would be what they call the Holy of Holies. You'd go in, and it would go in, and you'd come into an inner chamber, and at one time there had been a solid gold image or whatever Nether that was, whether it was hot, it was, at Edfu would have been Horus, at Isis would have been, Philae would have been Isis, etc., etc. All the statues are gone, of course. They've all been melted down in antiquity. But that's where you can feel the energy. It's centered. That's where the energy is centered. And that's where, like you said, the priests, where you guys went, not by accident, because your guides were leading you there, but that's where we would do our meditations. We would take our group, go around the altar, and there are always cyanide altars, like at Philae. If you go into the Holy of Holies, you have a great altar there, which is thousands of years older than the temple. Again, they would take pieces from old temples, put them in the new temples to sanctify it. The Masons do that today. A temple becomes, when they put their energies into it, when they put their energy of the Nether into it, they considered it a living entity. So in other words, they did not separate between organic and inorganic like we do. Organic is life, inorganic is not. No. They saw rocks and trees and stones also had consciousness.
So all the information the tour guides were giving us while we're on this tour, I have it like in my head now, but now I'm realizing what they were saying. It's just, it's not the full truth. So
that's Amen. That's the age of Amen. That's the point. That's the point. I'm going to say that next week about Torah, New Testament, and Quran. How many millions of people in the world, billions of people, look at those books as the word of God, the absolute truth. And here's Hakim saying, if it had to be written down, it's not the whole truth. That's why they came up with Kabbalah. What do you think Kabbalah was? Again, next week we'll go into detail. Kabbalah is the oral tradition that was not put into the Torah.
So the one thing that I noticed was in each massive temple that we went to, there was all of the glyphs, but there was all these like stories and stories and stories and stories of like the different things that the tribes went through. But they were saying that these temples were all, the people who built them were all in competition with the other temples to see who can make the biggest one so they can show that they had the most ruling power.
Again, we're going to talk about the corruption of religion next week. We'll go into more detail about that.
Yeah, because that's when that all started.
In essence, again, like everything they say, there's a bit of truth and a bit of non-truth. Because there was what Shwala de Lubitsch, who's a great person. He's very, I always tell people, I recommend him, but he's difficult to read. This is a Frenchman, a philosopher, mathematician who came along in the early part of the 20th century and decided that what Egyptology was saying was wrong. There was a previous civilization, there was a previous knowledge, and he called it the temple. And he differentiated the fact that it was an inner temple and an outer temple. The outer temple could be your lay priests. It could be the scribes. Now, perhaps most of the scribes who were master artists to draw beautifully didn't have the understanding of what they were drawing. They could draw the symbols, but they didn't know the inner, because it's an outer meaning and an inner meaning of the glyphs. Well, we say an exoteric meaning and an esoteric meaning. And I'll give you a prime example in a minute. So that there was always a group from the beginning who kept the secrets. But again, it's Amen. It's hidden. They kept it to themselves. And they didn't give it to the people.
Right.
Again, the expression, the priests knew how to manipulate the ka of the people. Priests, just like today. What does the media do today? What does television add? They know how to work on your emotions, your fears, all of that shit. And that's what religion was all about. So they knew how to use that, but they kept it to themselves. But that inner temple came down to be the Rosicrucians, the Masons, the Theosophical Society, the secret societies that came down to Western Europe and to today, passed on the teachings. So it was always there. There always was an inner group. But the outer lay teachings, again, people could not read or write. Reading and writing was exclusive to the priest's class, to the royalty, and the upper class. The lay people just looked at these things like they were cartoons.
Right.
And the priests would tell them what was going on, what the meanings were. And the priests would tell them again, this is going to be next week, we're the intermediary for the gods. You can't speak to the gods. We can, and we'll tell you what. Well, that again, religion is the corruption of spirituality.
Well, of course. But this leads me to the next question. This is a burning question I have. So you see these little, the glyphs, you see figures of the bird head with the man body. I believe those are blue avians.
Blue avians?
Blue avians, the species blue avians. Have you heard of that?
No.
Do you want to hear about?
Sure, go ahead.
You
I
do?
want to hear what you think.
Okay.
Of course.
Well, blue avians are, Corey Good is kind of known, this guy that had, an experience with the blue avians. And I've also had I feel psychic, downloads from blue avians. So basically a blue avian species is the blue people. It's with the beard, not the beard, the beak, and they have the male body, but they're in the hieroglyphs. And those are an alien species that they're here. They only telecommunicate. They don't use any language, and they work with frequency and sound, and they teach technology. These alien species teach technology, and they represent what we see now as our birds today. So the birds that we have today that chirp are sending sound waves into the frequencies and adjusting. This is an idea, a concept that I would love to believe, because it sounds grand and it sounds wonderful. Who knows?
Again, it's a nuts and bolts explanation for a metaphysical principle. The idea is the soul, the spirit, is not bound to the earth. So whenever you see the male head and the bird body,
with the beard, with the beak.
No, not with the beak. Always with a human head. So you're confusing two different symbols.
I'm talking about that.
Yeah, but you're confusing two different symbols. Okay.
Okay, so tell me.
The ba is always a human head and a bird body.
That's
the spirit. That's
the
spirit.
Right.
Okay.
But I'm talking about something else. I'm talking about the one that has.
I know what you mean, and that's a possibility. But what I'm trying to make you understand, what the confusion is, these are not necessarily physical entities. When you're in this state of consciousness, do you understand that there is a template that exists in dimension for every creature that's ever existed?
Yes.
And every any creature you can imagine.
Yes.
Ever existed.
And we have new creatures coming up all the time in our oceans. You're finding creatures in our forests. Who's putting them there? And they're getting more strange and more awesome looking, and they're finding them all the time.
They're always there.
They're templates. I believe that. 100%.
They're always there. Again, we're not going to go off into that.
Okay.
So, okay.
Anyway.
So then the idea then is they created this civilization using an understanding of sound and water and solar energy. Okay. And so you go to the sites and all the dynasties happen. You go from a new kingdom. Again, in chemitology, we don't use we have to use their timeline because the people understand. But there was no new kingdom, there was no old kingdom, there was no upper, lower Egypt. This is all what the Greeks included. And the Greeks, basically what we would say is that Egyptology is Greco-Roman mythology. The Greeks and the Romans, the indigenous people of Kemet, did not write down their histories. It was always just oral. So it was transmitted to the Greeks, and what's transmitted to the Romans is what they misinterpreted as the history.
And they add their own agendas, probably.
Always. So that's why dynastic history is confusing, because it does get patriarchal.
So what time period are we currently in right now?
We're coming to a new Cheper, a new dawn. That's why Hakim called this the awakening.
We're coming
out of Amen. 5,000 years of Amen, of darkness, of hidden.
So we're coming out of that.
Yes.
And we're doing a rebirth, reawakening into
newborn.
Right.
Rebirth of consciousness. To be babies again.
Right.
Baby consciousness.
That's what's happening.
That's why the scarab beetle was a symbol of our work. And let me show you how esoteric, how do you understand? Ach! People, it's exoteric, meaning is life. Everybody knows, oh, it's the key of life. I go into a store, people say, oh, you're wearing the key of life, especially in Egypt, because that's what they know. Oh, you wear the key of life, young. I say, yes, but that's not what it really means. Do you know what it really means? Of course not. They do not know what it really means. Okay, let me show you how it means life. Now you'll get people today with a patriarchal interpretation will say, okay, it's the womb and the penis connected for unity. Wrong. Thanks for playing. No. It is the womb, but it's the fallopian tubes and the vagina. Physically, mundanely, where do we come from? Where does life come from? From the womb. Okay? But that's only the exoteric meaning. The esoteric meaning is it means water. Water. Why? Well, it's an interesting thing. All the keys, even through dynastic times, to the temples, were always in the shape of an ankh. Why? Because water is the key to life. And the temples also became known as the per ankh, the house of life. You can see it. I'm
so curious, and I don't know when to add this or how we should do this on a show, but I'm so curious about in matriarchy, how sexuality was perceived or how women acted in sexuality compared to like now, or how shame, religion brought in shame. But
well, I was going to save that till next week because it comes out of religion. I mean, it comes out of the idea of spirituality.
Before religion,
before religion, if it's only spirituality, then everything we do is a spiritual act. Making love.
That's what I believe too.
Making love and defecating. Urinating, reproducing, and eliminating. All sacred acts. There was no separation of sacred and profane. So, when it comes to patriarchy, is when it becomes a profane act. And that's what we're going to talk about. Because women lose the position, lose their understanding, lose their vulnerability, then sexuality has to become, because women control sexuality, it becomes evil.
Has women throughout history always been seen as a sexual object, or is it women have been always in that sexual vibration and that's how they're seen by men?
The word prostitute and whore is only 5,000 years old.
That says a lot. Okay.
Sexuality was a sacred act.
Because it's natural. It comes with the
body. Even masturbating, whatever you could think of, was a sacred act. Now, I'm going to go in more detail because I'm going to talk about practices.
I did a video on that topic because I wanted to dispel all these notions, about sexuality. So I did a video on how people can take care of themselves sexually, and I did it in a way like a teacher would. And I explained it that it's okay if you're spiritual and to still be sexual. It's okay. There's
no separation. There's no separation.
Right. That's what I say that too. So yeah, I'm very fascinated because
again, look, key understanding. This age of Amen is the age of separation of us.
So that's where
them.
Shame came in.
There was an understanding of male and female.
Okay.
We were just different aspects of this ash.
Right.
The feminine and masculine were understood, but there wasn't women's work, there wasn't men's work, there wasn't, again, the original. We'll go back. I'm going to do it next week. I'm going to go in much more detail next week. But I want to continue on because the idea then is to understand the chapter we talk about the cataclysm. People understand, how did this all change? What did it all change? Well, the cycles are natural. They're indeterminate lengths of time. But this event happened around 14,000 years ago, a supernova that exploded in the sky. They must have been seen it in Egypt. And it affected everything in our solar system. Everything. And so senses started to wane. And then people started to understand we're going to lose this understanding. And so they got to develop stories were passed down. And the stories about the event, the cataclysm, became one of the major events around the fire.
Which, was that a part of the flood?
It is the flood.
So
it is the flood myth itself.
Listen. There was a crack in the middle of the earth And it came up the
No.
oceans? Okay.
Well, and to some degree, they were correct. I mean, there are vents all the time now. Vents with magma coming up in the middle of the oceans all the time. That's how the Hawaiian Islands were formed, by magma coming up from a crack in the earth.
And was there a lot of water in the center of the earth prior to Pangaea, do you think?
Yeah.
Or Pangaea?
Pangaea. Actually, the center of the earth is molten.
Molten.
You know that?
And
And
then
actually, there was a Norwegian physicist who proved in the 90s that at the center of our planet is a giant crystal.
right.
A giant crystal.
Yes.
And that's what keeps us
That makes
spinning.
so much sense. Of course it is.
Keeps us spinning.
Right.
It keeps and the Commissions also talked about that the sun has risen in the west twice before it's risen east. So in other words, we've had at least 3 or 4 polar shifts in the history of our planet, where the North Pole became the South Pole became the North Pole. And the Commissions knew
Are
that.
those separate civilizations during those times?
Oh, that's before civilization. These
Okay.
things happened before there were humans,
Okay.
but it's happened in our time.
So those
It
are the
has-
eras.
There is a story. It's actually the movie the Day the Earth Stood Still was based on an ancient Peruvian myth that there was a day when the earth did not rotate on its axis, and everything went into chaos.
Wow.
But that was a cyclical change. So everything waned, and that led to writing, and that became to the civilization, and that became to all the dynasties and all the patriarchy.
When you start writing, does that mean you're starting to separate yourself from yourself? So instead of telepathy, which is instant oneness, right? So the second you start to have self-reflection, you're looking at something outside of you. That's when the separation started, and that's when miscommunication began. Is that
That's
correct?
good. That's good. That's a good understanding, and it's a development of ego. It's to say that we didn't have egos before that. People, what?
Because when you start
Ego.
looking at pictures of yourself, that's where the ego of self-identification and value system and labeling and separating and all of that started.
The concept of I, me, mine is patriarchal.
That's why animals in the animal kingdom, they're already one with each other because
Exactly.
there's no hieroglyphs. They're not writing pictures of themselves.
No, and dolphins don't make statues of themselves in the ocean. And that's why they're superior to us. Not equal in consciousness, they're superior.
True.
They don't start wars.
No,
They're matriarchal. Do you know that
they're matriarchal.
the greatest example of a matriarchy are killer whales, orcas.
Well,
orcas.
that was my symbol all through my childhood. I was obsessed with them, and I didn't know why. But they also have the yin yang,
Exactly.
and they're my favorite.
Their pod is arranged around the oldest female
Yes.
and her daughters. The oldest female and her daughters and her granddaughters are the center of the pod. All the males are exterior.
Yeah.
It's the same in the lions. Why? The king of the beasts, the great lion, tremendous, regal animal, but she just keeps them around to make babies and to protect her. That's all. She does the hunting. She does the raising of the young. She does the education. She just keeps them around to make babies.
After our last episode, you were talking about how the Kemits understood cats and how cats kind of gravitate towards the alpha female.
Always.
And so since our show, I've been watching my cat and her behavior. Oh my God, I did not notice how much she has to be. She's right there.
Uh-huh.
She has to be in the same room with me. Wherever I go, she's talking to me. She's following me. It always is around. And it's not just because I feed her. Other people feed her in the house too.
No.
That's me.
Oh, no, that's natural. Let me show you what our feral cat does, how amazing she is. First of all, she does the same thing. When she comes in the daytime, she'll go wherever room my wife is. When she's working on the computer, she'll go on her lap. She'll go on the floor next to her. She's outside, she'll go outside and lay down next to her. She's in another room, she'll go, okay.
Me too.
But listen to what she does. She, typically feral, they would normally, like a lion, sleep all day, rest all day, and at twilight, they come awake. They hunt at night. They're nocturnal. They hunt till dawn, and then they come asleep again. Okay, so this is what our little feral Cleopatra does every day. When it started to get dark, she comes into the back door and she starts yowling for her mommy.
Yeah.
Mommy, come out. She doesn't want to come in. Come on, you want to come in? No.
No.
You have to come out. Teresa has to come out just to be with her. And then she runs around wild. She gets wild. She runs around. And then she goes off to hunt. Because the alpha female has to start the hunt. So she doesn't start the hunt until my wife comes out. She doesn't have to go off with her.
I didn't know that's
just to be with her.
She meows at me at that hour, but I thought she was complaining about something.
Exactly. We think they want to be fed. No. They
I
want to
can't
come
tell
in.
you
No.
how many
Give
mice
them
and
food.
things
You
brought
give
in.
them food. You give them food. You give them water. That isn't what they want. They want you to come out to start the hunt. The alpha female starts the hunt.
I can't believe you said. I cannot believe you said the orca, because that has been a very major symbol for me, and the dolphins.
Yep.
It's
They're
incredible.
amazing. They're tremendous matriarchal people.
So in our human DNA coding, I'm taking liberties in saying it that way.
Right.
Do we have a deep ancient understanding of aquatic animals or the aquatic world?
All creatures. Again, when you're operating in 350 senses, I don't think there's any such different thing as an ET.
Because
listen to me. Listen to me. The ancient people knew we're only visitors here. Okay? This is where it gets into your subject, where I can go into your subject and do it like I want without people being hung up in the material ET thing. Okay? People are always saying to me, again, with this statement, it got all people involved, because Ptah is the one who pops from the blue, through the waters, from the sky. Obviously, people, well, he's talking about extraterrestrials. This is what David Childress does on Ancient Aliens. The ancient Egyptians believed their gods came from the sky and they were extraterrestrial, blah, blah, blah. Well, they believed we're all extraterrestrials. Understand that. The ancient Khemitologist with 360 degrees understood we're only visitors here. They may have also believed of the 42 tribes, they came from 42 different directions in the sky. Each tribe comes from a different solar system, from Vega, from Aldebaran, from wherever you want to say, all the different...
That makes so much sense, obviously, with the skin colors, the facial shapes, the language, the tones, everything is just...
So therefore, they didn't believe in ETs.
Yeah.
They believed we were the ETs.
Right.
We are interdimensional beings.
And back then, you didn't have all this electricity, so you can be very close to the cosmic, the sky above you in the evenings. That you see
and the green lines and the natural zones of the earth.
So your natural body cycle was happening along the lines of just nature, and you were much more closer to your divine essence, of course.
Much more.
Yeah. So yeah, as I evolve through my own consciousness, I keep being drawn back to the water and electricity, these two fundamentals that the human body is based on. So I keep it's not an obsession, it's just a reconnection. I feel like I'm just constantly reconnecting to energy, electricity, and water.
Right, we're 98% water.
Yeah.
And our system is run by electricity.
And water is symbolic for energy flow, because that's
and sound moves faster through water than it does air. So sound moving through the water. Oh yeah. Sound moves much faster. This is why a blue whale, they have shown that a blue whale can communicate with another blue whale 100 miles away underwater through sonar. So sound is the key. That's why they understood sound. That's why they named the baby the first sound the baby makes, the first noise the baby makes. That becomes your name for the first 8 years. Where you didn't speak, we didn't talk like this. We communicated telepathically. Sound was sacred. Sound was used for chanting, for healing. We can get into next week, because it's part of religion, how they use sound for healing, and how the many people around the world today that are continuing. Every musician is doing healing with his sound, whether it's hard rock, punk rock, whether it's rap music, whether it may sound dysphonic to us, it's still doing something to us. Sound can heal. Sound can kill. Sound can kill. Do you know what was the major weapon the U.S. government used in the Iraq War?
What?
Do you remember before? I don't know if you remember back to 2003, 2002, 2003. But we were told, oh, it's going to be terrible fight if we invade Iraq, because they have the Republican Guard. And the Republican Guard are one of the great trained armies in the world, and we're going to have trouble with them. Okay? We start the Iraq War. Within 2 weeks, thousands of Republican Guardsmen were coming out of the desert and surrendering to the U.S. soldiers. Bleeding from the nose, bleeding from the ears.
Oh, gosh.
They were hit with a sonic weapon that we tested for the first time in 2004. 2003. A sonic weapon. So sound can heal, sound can kill.
And you know, this planet, if sound wasn't important, then we would not hear a sound. Nobody would be speaking. Animals wouldn't be making noises. Birds wouldn't be chirping. The sound of the trees whispering in the wind you wouldn't hear anything. It would be silent if sound.
And that's another sense, because you're not hearing it with your ears. You're hearing it with your inner ear.
Yeah. Well, isn't
Another
everything
sense.
the inner ear?
Well, no, not everything. Certain things we have a range.
Okay.
I mean, we have a pretty poor hearing as far as other animals. We have a range where we can hear that's infrasound or ultrasound, right?
Right.
But we feel the vibration of ultrasound even if we can't hear it. So
Well,
that's our body.
whole-
That's our body. Our cells are sensing that sound, not our ears, not the cochlea, not the eardrums. Sound can be perceived directly. That's why knowledge, the Khemitologist understood more than the brain. Why do people always ask, why did they not mummify the brain? They took out all these vital organs. They took out the heart, they took out the lungs, they took out the liver, and they put them in the canopic jars. But they didn't use the brain. They put in some chemicals, they liquefied the brain, and it ran out through the nose. Why? Because they understood two forms of knowledge, the knowledge of the head and the knowledge of the heart. And of the two, they valued the knowledge of the heart the greater. So they knew the brain had its limitations. That true knowledge was stored in our cells, not just in the brain. So the brain was discarded. So knowledge is perceived directly into our being. That's a sense. That's a knowledge, that's a nether. And then it comes processed through the brain. And then our cerebral cortex processes it, and it has to label it. It has to categorize it. That's how our brains work. We cannot take in
How come they
all
don't
the...
teach this in school in the 5th and 6th grade, how the brain works at this level? Because that would change the world. If people knew the brain was just for processing, we would be having a whole different planet.
If we have 316 senses, we're constantly receiving sensory input. Constantly receiving multitudes from different dimensions, physical, non-physical,
Our whole being
energy,
is
energy.
energy.
But our brain cannot process that.
Nope.
So it has to have the cerebral cortex, has to filter. Certain things are pushed to the subconscious. They're still there. They can be accessed. That's what's called Jung's whole work, to access the subconscious, make it conscious. That's what we do in psychology. So, but the brain only filters. That's what goes to the ego, the cerebral cortex. What's necessary for the moment, for survival. You have to eat, you have to breathe, you have to go to the bathroom, you have to urinate, you have to appreciate love, all the things that are in the higher cortex. But the brain we're constantly through our body processing multiple images, and we can't perceive them all. But the more sensitive we get, the more we work on it, the more we get multiple images. And those are the people that channel. Those are the people that see interdimensional beings. And then some people think, oh, these are actual physical beings. Again, John Varel Melchizedek, who I got very close to at one time, and I can send you a picture of he and I together, said there's 3 types of consciousness. One that we consider positive, one we would consider negative. But he said the overwhelming majority of consciousness in existence is neither. It just witnesses. Does not judge, is not male, is not female, does not have any value. Just witnesses. So what does every guru have taught? From the Buddha to Maitreya to everyone that's come, from Jesus to Moses to Muhammad, teaching us to witness life, consciousness that's all around. And everything is sacred. Everything is divine. And they knew that. We once lived like that. And again, we've gone through 5,000 years of darkness. And so we're at this point. And again, as Sachin said in that interview with me, from birth, oh, it's a boy, put a blue blanket. A girl, put a pink blanket. Oh, little boy, you can do this. You can play football. You can grow up to be president. You can do this. You can be a constructor, a truck driver. Little girl, up until just 200 years ago, you could be a housewife and a mother. That's it. And why? This is serious, what I'm going to say now. George Carlin was one of my favorite philosophers.
Mm-hmm. He's amazing.
George Carlin used to say, women are crazy and men are stupid. But he said, the reason why women are crazy is because men are stupid.
I heard that one before. I love that.
So seriously,
Yeah,
every woman has been damaged since the beginning of patriarchy from birth.
it's true.
Told you, you can't do this.
You also
can't
have to go back to and how men were raised.
Yeah, well, again, we're raised to be,
it's
women are raised to be crazy, men are raised to be stupid.
Yeah, it's true.
That's the point.
Yeah.
So when men become intelligent, when men can understand the feminine, open the feminine themselves, that 49% of every man that's feminine to the 51% that's masculine, only 1% difference is the plumbing and the hormones. When you can open it, like you said, more men are feeling today, more men cry. And more women are getting assertive, aggressive, becoming MMA fighters, WWE, becoming truck drivers, but now becoming president. Now we're going back to the way it was in ancient Kemet. It always has to swing. We had to swing. Each movement has to swing. The civil rights movement had to be, because Black African Americans were given no rights, couldn't vote, couldn't live up to the creed of this country. So we had to swing and do a lot of affirmative action and things like that, which is no good today, affirmative action. But the women's movement, so we had to swing, radical lesbians, radical feminism, the man of the enemy, blah, blah, blah. And now it's swinging back. The same thing with every movement that's been gay, women, Black, every movement of consciousness has to swing till it comes back. So now we're at the stage where we're not saying, no, women are not superior, men are not superior. We're all equal beings of consciousness with unlimited potential. The only limits we put are those we allow to be put on ourselves. First, by parents, then by religion, then by education, then by policy, by government. The only way is to step outside of it all, as Hakim did at a young age, and I fortunately was able to do, to see yourself outside of yourself. For me, to look at myself as a white man, as a Jew, as an American, and analyze what all those things mean, and realize they are all artificial constructs. White woman, Latin, Norwegian, all artificial constructs that tell you that's who you are. No, we are to define who we are. And we are humans becoming. We are not human beings, because we're not there. We're humans becoming. And the goal of the very ancient Commissions, and it existed through the dynasties, even through patriarchy, existing till today, is to wake up and become conscious.
It's safe to say that from the time we started writing our first glyphs is where miscommunication began.
Obviously.
Since then, it has been just trying to correct this miscommunication.
Obviously. But Hakim would say, Hakim would make a key point, there's no blame. In other words, women should not blame men for patriarchy. It is the cycle.
Yeah.
It is natural. It is
That's
time to let
important point.
Yeah. Again,
if you don't have the stop making everything wrong part of the story, then this is where we get back into duality, and you go back into you just never get out of the dark. You know, it's a vicious cycle.
Once you create an enemy, you create the separation. There is no enemy. There's no friend, there is no enemy.
Even with everything you're saying, I would really want our listeners to understand that there is no, we're not making one side right or wrong, or making patriarchy wrong. We're just pointing out where the
natural cycles. It has been a natural cycle, but you're right to point out where we went astray. That's the point. That's becoming conscious to understand. Okay, that's where it went off. That's where it went off. That's why today we're living most from a white European lifestyle of the Middle Ages that totally went away from indigenous thinking, from indigenous people. Now we're bringing back indigenous people as our teachers, because they existed for thousands of years with floods, with flus, with viruses, with earthquakes, with tornadoes, with cataclysms, and they survived. We are the survivors. Understand that this cataclysm that happened 14,000 years ago may have wiped out 95% of humanity. But we're the 5%. We're the descendants of the 5% who survived. So we are survivors. So that's the key thing to understand. We've been through this before. If we become conscious, take responsibility for ourselves and our actions, we can get to anything.
There was a thing that happened to me in real life that's it's so symbolic to what we're talking about. So for those of you that know or may not know, I'm a shaman. I've been a shaman for 10 years, and I've
We're
been
going
a life
to talk
coach.
a lot about shamanism next week.
Okay, yeah. So being a modern day shaman is not easy. It's actually really, really hard because you're going against the grain. You're going against the grain, and you put yourselves on the front lines.
Ignorance is bliss.
But you know,
Once you make a conscious step to go on the path, you're making a conscious decision to deal with all the obstacles and with all the negativity that's going to come your way. It's easy to remain ignorant.
Yeah, it's easier to hide. And So I was in the middle of leading a journey, and it was a plant medicine journey. And the woman, she wasn't an artist yet, but she was a writer. She was an author, and she had a notepad with her. And I was sitting in front of her directly, and I started this kind of a channeled message, and I was going in very strong into her mind. She grabs the notepad and the pen. She's journeying, and she's trying to write what I'm saying. And I just stared at her. And I said, why do you need this secondary interface to understand what I'm saying in real time? And she put the notepad down without even blinking an eye. She just stared in my eyes, and her whole life changed in that moment, and she became a prolific artist, and now her art is everywhere. It was just that moment where she got it, that you don't need that separation. You don't need the piece of paper and the pen to understand what you're hearing, because you're interfacing with all of your senses at once. So it's real-time information coming in and processing immediately. I mean, this is what it's all about. This is the power center. This is what creation is all about. This is
beautiful.
Yeah, this is the temple.
One of the great masters I loved was Rajneesh. He went by Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, a lady who was called Osho. He used to say, you have to sing your song and dance your dance, whether anyone is listening or not. That's right.
Did you ever meet any of the gurus like Yogananda or Osho?
Not them, but I met a few. I was initiated into a path called Suraj Shabbat Yoga. So I met a man named Singh. It was one of the Singhs. I forgot, it's Kirpal Singh, one of his disciples. And but no, I was then taught that there are no gurus. There are no gurus. This is why I liked, Krishnamurti. Because Krishnamurti used to say, there are no gurus. There are no gurus. There are no gurus.
He was such a rebel. I loved it.
But you see, Rajneesh used to make fun of him. He would send his people, who were called sannyasins, and they would wear the red or orange robes. And he said they would come in the first row of Krishnamurti, and Rajneesh would say, Krishnamurti would become unenlightened immediately. He would begin shouting. He would get angry. But he said, but Rajneesh said that was a big mistake, because the more Krishnamurti would say to his people, I am not your guru, I am not your teacher, the more people would say, oh, this is a great guru.
Isn't that funny?
I must follow him.
Well,
that's the cult of personality. You and I talked about it. That's why I don't do Ancient Alien, why I didn't do these shows. I don't get into the cult of personality, all this garbage. I don't have a lot of...
I know that's the one area I have some pet peeves, and I get a little irritated when people start bringing up names of people that like to have like these followings, that they're the savior. I get really concerned about that, because as soon as you get to the pinnacle of human evolution with consciousness, you immediately understand oneness. It's such a large degree that you fully understand the group mentality, and it's no longer singularity. You're no longer looking at the individual. So the second I see that, I get nervous, because I'm like, well, what? I don't understand. What is it that you need that's separate from the group? I mean, I'm authentically a teacher. So are you. I have no problem talking about it. But
that's right.
I mean, I got a kindergarten teacher who taught me when I was 5 years old. I don't worship her. She's just taught me.
I talk about, again, I use another famous expression by another one I loved, Sir Isaac Newton. He would say, if I've been able to see farther than other men, it's because I've stood on the back of giants.
Right. Famous quote.
Give credit to your teachers. That's why I talk Hakim. I talk this one, I talk that one, board. All your teachers are important who brought you to the end. But you don't surrender your power to say that I have to do whatever the guru tells me to do.
No. If you're doing that, you miss the entire point.
Certain people are so lost, they have to go that way. This is why Don Juan said he had to use the plant helpers with Castaneda, because Castaneda was totally absorbed with Western garbage. and he had to clear the garbage, and you did the plant helpers. I did plant helpers. I did the shamanic path. We're going to talk about the shamanic path. Like I told you before, I took LSD by myself. We're going to get into that again more next week. But where I want to leave it is leave it for groundwork, which I discussed that last time, for framework for the next discussion. Patriarchy to matriarchy. Matriarchy to patriarchy. People are wrong to think that patriarchy was the father or the husband replacing the mother. Absolutely not. It is the son, S-O-N, who replaces the mother. There was a classic statue in the town square of the city of Babylon, ancient Babylon. And there was the state god, Marduk, who some people think was an extraterrestrial. Marduk is taking a sword and splitting his mother, Tiamat, in two. Different interpretations of that. There's a modern planetologist named Tom Van Flandern interprets that to say that they're actually talking about a celestial event, that there had been another planet that was between Mars and us called Tiamat, which exploded, and it is now called the asteroid belt. And it's just asteroids here. That's why there's a large gap between Mars and us where there should be a planet. But others say that the statue is actually recording a historical change from patriarchy, from matriarchy to patriarchy. He's killing his mother. The gravest sin is matricide of ancient people, to kill one's mother. And there it is. That's how patriarchy comes to be, through matricide. The son replaces the mother. So all our gods, Yahweh, Jehovah, Allah, from Shiva, from all the male deities in our modern religions, are sons, S-O-N. They're then called son of the sun, S-U-N, as they are in Kemet. Each so-called male king is called the son of the sun.
This is going to be a very fascinating show.
So next week, how religion comes to be.
I cannot wait.
And your favorite subject, sexuality.
Yes! Thank you so much, Stephen. You are a mastermind technician of unbelievable magnitude. I don't care if they don't understand in traditional Egyptology and they don't understand. First of all, the word alternative eventually will become extinct itself.
Exactly.
There will no longer be anything called alternative.
Chemitology will replace Egyptology.
Thank you very much.
All right, sweetheart.
All right, thank you. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.